Well, hello everyone. My name is Charlotte Aldrich. I am Director of the Centre for Progressive Policy. The CPP is proud to host the Inclusive Growth Network and today celebrate our 1-year anniversary. So thank you so much for joining us 1 year on from the political launch that many of you will have attended last year. This is a private roundtable event, but attendees are welcome to post about it on social media using the hashtag IGN anniversary and the Twitter handle IGN tweets, and my colleague will put that in the chat for you so you've got reference to that. Please note that this Zoom call is being recorded, however, but it's primarily for our note-taking purposes, entirely for our note-taking purposes. We might come back to you to sign off any quotes we might hope to use in the run-up to the publication of the IGN communique, though, more on which later. So we're delighted to have political representatives from across the IGN's members of 12 local and combined authorities. We're also joined by a small group of fantastic external speakers who'll be sharing a short provocation each on today's theme of just transition. So joining us today are Richard Lochhead, MSP, who is the Scottish Minister for Just Transition, Employment and Fair Work. We have Henry Murison, who's Director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. Nick Robbins, Professor of Sustainable Finance at LSE's Grantham Research Institute, and Andrea Fernandez, Director of Climate Finance, Knowledge and Partnerships at C40 Cities. They'll each give some brief remarks, followed by responses from our IGN political leaders on how you are driving green and inclusive growth in your respective places. So today we're pretty tight on time, a lot to get through and a lot of fantastic things we want to hear from each of you about the work that you're doing. And towards the end of the session, we'll also then focus our attention on the IGN communique that we're going to be publishing closer to the COP summit itself. So I won't say much, only to say that I'm delighted that the IGN continues to receive your support, and we're looking forward to another successful year. So inviting first, therefore, Richard Lochhead, MSP, Scottish Minister for Just Transition, Employment and Fair Work, to give his thoughts on these critical themes. Richard, do we have you?
Yes, hello. You can hear me okay, yes?
We can, yes,
Good
thank
stuff.
you.
Yeah, I can see you all smiling and nodding, so it's a real pleasure to join you, and thanks, Charlotte, for just the short introduction there. I'm in the Scottish Parliament at the moment, and it's a busy parliamentary day, so apologies for not being able to stay with you for too long, but it's a great opportunity for me just to say a few words and set the scene of hopefully what's happening here in Scotland. So I am the Minister for Just Transition, Employment and Fair Work in the Scottish Government. I've been in government for a number of years, but that's my new role as from the elections in May, and it's the first ever Just Transition Minister appointed in the Scottish administration. So I'm really obviously honoured, but it's a very exciting time and a very important time, and my job is to oversee what's happening across the Scottish Government in terms of going towards our net zero targets in 2045 and the just transition to get there. So big responsibility and a lot of coordination to do and a lot of different things to take forward. As you're all aware, just transition is not a new concept, but in terms of what it means for the Scottish Government, what we want to see is obviously a greener future for Scotland, but one that's also fairer for everyone that lives in Scotland at the same time. And a just transition is about the process that's got to be undertaken to get there. It's about working in partnership with everyone who's going to be impacted by the transition to net zero. And we can only do that. We've got to work in partnership. That's the only way we're going to build a climate resilient economy in the countries through the economic transformation that lies ahead in the next few years. We're the platform, the Just Transition, to do things differently, to build a better society, and to use the opportunity to tackle inequalities and injustice in our country at the same time. As everyone will be aware, the energy transition and it's going to have a fundamental impact on our economy in Scotland and indeed throughout. And again, the energy transition in particular will be an opportunity to address entrenched inequalities and child poverty. And of course, particularly what's a big issue in Scotland is fuel poverty at the same time as we go through that energy transition. So that transition's got to be planned for, and it's got to happen at all levels, regions, sectors, communities, and the role is fundamentally important. This is all
Just having a few problems with Richard's connection.
also got to be a bottom-up process. The only way it'll work is if individuals.
Richard, we're just having a few problems with your connection. Maybe try turning your video off for us.
Okay.
We're getting the gist of it, but we don't want to miss anything.
Okay. Okay. Can you hear me if I turn my video off?
Yes, that's much better.
Hello?
Yes, that's much better.
Right, I'll turn my video off so you can hear me. So I'm not sure how much you caught of that. I was just talking about the energy system and using that as an opportunity and
We're just losing you again, sorry.
in terms of the energy transition, poverty, and individuals, households, communities, is fundamental to this. And of course, the role of local authorities and local communities is fundamentally important as well. Since I've taken this role, I've noticed that and witnessed how Scotland's local authorities are certainly in the front line of the response to the climate crisis. And from a Scottish Government perspective, it's really important we do all we can to support our councils, and we're working very closely with the councils, Scottish local authorities and the Scottish cities. Example of that, for instance, Scotland's Central Inclusive Growth, which published a toolkit to support local areas develop evidence-based policies to deliver inclusive economic growth. And their work's been piloted in North Ayrshire and will be rolled out to other parts of Scotland as well. There is no one-size-fits-all solution to this. That's why it's really important we look towards places that face similar challenges and that we share best practice across the country. And of course, COP26 starts in just a few weeks' time. Just transition is going to be one of the two key themes. Of course, that focus to ensure it helps raise awareness and understanding of climate change issues and empowers the public to feel confident they can take meaningful action as well. Clearly, is to have really strong partnerships and commitment, local, national, international cooperation to tackle the climate crisis. And this call, we want to get involved in that if they're not. Scotland's learning some hard lessons. The just transition is so important. We experienced unfair and poorly managed transitions in the past, particularly our former coal mining communities across elsewhere in the UK, where they'll carry the scars of how that handled back in the closure of
Richard, I'm afraid we're losing you again.
Coal mine and economy. There's got that happening in the future. Well, am I back?
You're very patchy, I'm afraid. It's coming in and out, so we might look to just sort of have a few final thoughts, if we may.
Okay, apologies for that. We've not experienced that before. I don't know what's going on there.
Richard, I'm sorry. I think we've lost you entirely now. So what we will do is we'll move to Henry Murison, if we may, and just noting Richard's key points there. So talking about a just transition not being a new concept, but that being about putting green and fair economy into practice, working in partners, particularly with communities and local authorities. He name-checked North Ayrshire as one of our IGN members, putting in place pilot of the Scottish Centre for Inclusive Growth evidence-based framework, and then about the importance of learning from previous transitions where many communities might still be carrying the scars and doing differently this time. Thanks so much, Richard. We'll hopefully come back to you later if we can improve your connection. So turning now to Henry, if we can.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. And again, I think those insights were really exciting to hear. I know it was difficult for us to make them all out, but I really appreciate being able to follow the Minister. I think what I would say from a Northern Powers perspective is the kind of the connection between net zero and economic rebalancing, or levelling up, as it's sometimes referred to by this government. But obviously many of the network have been doing this work around addressing regional inequalities and the impacts on their places for many years. And so this isn't a new space for us to be in. I think one of the things we would really emphasise in Northern Powers Partnership, and I know with Ben Lucas from Metro Dynamics here, there are many other examples of institutions in the north of England, including our Metro mayors in particular, who are thinking along very similar lines as we approach the Convention of the North, which is a public sector and a local government-led conversation that will be held in the north, as we now know, and it's been announced next month in October, that we will bring together these ideas around how business, the public sector in the wider sense, and central government need to work together to make the most of the just transition. And what comes from that, whether it's institutions like the new investment bank located in Leeds, or other parts of the architecture that's being constructed to help us achieve net zero, we have to remember that we also at the same time have to not double invest. So we can't think about how we're going to address regional equality separate to how we approach this transition, because the two things have to be done hand in hand. I don't think as a country it would be rational to not realise, as research by those like IPPR North has shown, that when there are many who work in sectors like energy that are being significantly disrupted by the transition to net zero, that we don't think about how those individuals, but also how those communities and places can benefit from the new opportunities that are being created. I think we do hear a lot positively about retrofit and the opportunities for significant local employment participation, but I would be very bold in saying that big opportunities like the future for small modular reactors in the UK, the government's decisions that we're about to get on carbon capture and storage with likely both the north of Scotland, but also the northeast in terms of Teesside, the Humber, alongside the Mersey coming forward as key locations for that activity to take place. And clearly that gives a big opportunity to use those significant amounts of industrial investments and underpinning by government of commercial investment in infrastructure to fit alongside particularly approaches to skills and to jobs and talent. Because I think one of the big opportunities that faces us, and we've tried to engage with this as a partnership, working alongside the N8 universities through something called Net Zero North, to think about how we can bring together research and development around net zero, specifically with skills transition, and doing that in a collaborative way across research intensive universities, the wider HE sector, and skills providers, both in apprenticeships and the college sector. And I think the final stage of that really is what the scale of innovation deals and arrangements will be targeted at net zero. There are particular parts of the north of England have huge opportunities at place level to help lead the transition for the benefit of the nation. So that's doing research and development as well as the direct employment opportunities. And I think where I would really try and emphasise is that you don't need a national plan for net zero transition and a national plan for levelling up. You need to have significant devolution of responsibility to places for both those things. And it is only at that level that you're going to get the join up. And of course, central government needs to play a role in bringing investment to bear and bringing support to those places and creating the right environment for investment. But the idea that either the net zero transition and the various point plans in the case of UK central government, and actually in the case of the devolved administrations as well, the idea that there isn't a place for subnational partnerships like ourselves and the Western Gateway, or for devolved authorities to play a role in leadership around this, is for the birds. And it is only at the level of place, I think, and at the level of collaboration at the city region level and at the economic region level around travel to work areas, that we can genuinely address some of the fundamental changes in people's lives we need to make. Because if we're bringing in private sector collaboration, it's going to be much easier to do that effectively when you've got empowered local organisations who can make the decisions themselves, rather than to wait for central government to be able to come through and support that. And I'm particularly keen to see how the local public sector in its wider sense, that includes both local authorities and combined authorities in England, not just in the north of England, can be given a greater role around that net zero transition. It's certainly something we want to see in the Levelling Up white paper. And it's a specific opportunity for BEIS and other departments to think seriously about where things are best done. Because in the end, the centralisation of the current government is against their policy drivers. So if you want to achieve net zero and you want to achieve levelling up, that's going to require significant further devolution. And that's not devolution for its own sake, for the purpose of constitutional federal attractiveness of our constitution. And as ever exciting that meets some of us on the line, what that really is about is getting things done and the practical opportunities that come from devolution. So it is a doing argument rather than an esoteric or an intellectual argument for devolution. And I think it's one that if this government wants to deliver on what it's promised the public and what it is about to promise the world at COP, it needs to do that. So it's so lovely to be with you, Charlotte, to be with the network. And I really appreciate the invitation. It's a real privilege to be here. And thank you so much for having me along.
Thank you. What a brilliant segue. Thinking about investment, thinking about devolution and the role of places. So in that, I'm going to now hand over to Nick Robbins, Professor in Practice, Sustainable Finance at LSE. And I'm sure we'll hear more from him on how we invest for this just green transition.
Well, thanks very much, Charlotte, and thanks for inviting me to speak to this great body. And really, thanks for your leadership. The draft statement you set out is really, really inspiring. Great to follow the Minister, and I've certainly been inspired in the work that Scotland has done, notably the Just Transition Commission, and then actually the programme for government, which Richard is leading. Not just the partnership he highlighted, but also particularly particular funds in Scotland, the Just Transition Fund, particularly for the North East. So really good to that. And Henry, really liked your thoughts about we can't do these things together. Separately, in a sense, we see Just Transition as the connective tissue between net zero and, if we call it levelling up, dealing with the inequalities in our society. So I just wanted to make 4 brief points looking through the finance lens, and I'm primarily going to look at that in terms of the finance that needs to be deployed in your regions, your communities, not necessarily local government finance. So 4 points, if I may. At the moment, we have a huge desire by UK banks, UK institutional investors, UK social financing organisations to invest in net zero, and particularly to invest in net zero at the place and local level. But the real issue is the lack of projects, of pipelines, and so on to do that. So we actually have what we didn't have 5 years ago. We have a desire to invest from the private sector. But actually, in a sense, we have a missing middle with actually that connectivity on the ground. And from your side, obviously, you have ambitious climate plans. You want to attract investment. So we need to connect those. So 4 points. Clearly, we need at the UK level, we need to have clear sense of strategic direction of just transition being inside the net zero strategy that's coming up. We would also endorse the idea of a UK-wide Just Transition Commission, really drawing on the place-based insights we've heard about. That would build on the experience that we've seen in Scotland. So that's the first. We really need at the UK level to have that strategic direction. That would obviously link with the Levelling Up white paper. We then need particularly market-making mechanisms. If we have this missing middle between latent supply of capital and also demand for capital, whether by yourselves, your small business entrepreneurs, your public sector, or whatever, we are developing, and this is particularly an idea from Andy Gouldson, who's really the pioneer of the Place-Based Climate Action Network, to think about local finance hubs, which would be potentially working at that economic regional level to actually develop pipelines, maybe to provide blended finance, de-risking, and also attract banks and investors and so on. And I must say that just to add, we are part of the LSE of this Place-Based Climate Action Network, which has Belfast Climate Commission, Edinburgh Climate Commission, Leeds, Surrey, Yorkshire, and so on. So first, we need that strategic direction. Secondly, we need to actually have these market-making mechanisms which connects the supply and demand for capital. Then we need institutions. We need anchor financial institutions. And we've already heard from Henry, the new UK Infrastructure Bank. We also have the British Business Bank, crucial for SMEs in Scotland, the Scottish National Investment Bank, and in Wales, the Development Bank. So we need to see these as real anchor institutions that can drive not just the greening part, but the local delivery and the just and fair part. EIB at a European level is a real driver for just transition within the EU. We need to ensure that the UKIB plays exactly the same role within the UK. And just transition is in the Articles of Association of the Scottish National Investment Bank. So really good DNA piece there. Other institutions, clearly we need anchor financial institutions at the local level. Local authority pension funds, clearly they need to deliver good pensions for yourselves and beneficiaries, local authority workers, but there's a real interest in place-based investment now. Great work being done by the Impact Investing Institute. How can they be brought on board for this? Community development finance institutions really filling a gap where the big banks, the commercial banks won't go. We're working closely with the responsible finance institution. Again, these are rooted institutions and need to be part of your investment strategies. And then new organizations. We are a terribly centralized, not just political system, but financial system, new mutual banks that are arising in the Southwest and so on. How do we grow these? And my final point is then financial instruments. One of the aspects of being a very centralized country is we don't have a municipal bond market. Your peers in France, in Sweden, in the US, and so on, as part of their climate finance plans, would be routinely issuing green bonds, social bonds, and so on. It is a real gap in our architecture in the UK. We do not have a municipal bond market where regions, devolved authorities, local authorities could be routinely issuing and directing capital from savers to your priorities. We have two local climate bonds already from Warrington, West Berkshire, but I would say as part of your message, that would be a real piece to fill in, because then you can link with local citizens who can invest in these and link to, as I say, the pools of capital around the world who want to invest. And I think it's time for the UK to develop that. So strategic direction, market making mechanisms, anchor financial institutions, and then instruments of which municipal green bonds would be one. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Really instructive there. The four very clear asks that we can be helping to advocate with central government and working with our members and wider local partners to try and enact. Finally, thank you, Nick. I will just turn to Andrea. Andrea, have we got you?
Hi there. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. And it's really fantastic network and great work you're doing. And the joint statement is just really fantastic and shows that strong commitment of local leaders. So I work with C40, which is a network of around 100 cities around the world. So I'm going to give a little bit more global perspective here. First, just to say, cities are so crucial on this transition to net zero. We know that 70% of energy-related emissions are in cities, and that cities have key authority over things like urban planning, how we build our cities, how we build for compactness, how we address climate risk in our urban planning, how we build around transport networks. They also have strong control over their transport systems, their buildings, waste management, decentralized energy. Of course, this all varies in different locations. And I think the comment on devolution is really important, in particular on the access to finance that cities have. But cities also really, obviously close to their people, their residents, their youth. They're where innovation happens. They're where the next climate solution will be discovered or demonstrated. And they're also where the economic and humanitarian impacts of climate catastrophes are most strongly felt. It was cities that were the first to embrace net zero targets. And I know because within the C40 network, we issued a report in 2016 called Deadline 2020, which talked about the need for cities to embrace the 1.5 target and to really focus on how they can have by 2020 plan to have their emissions by 2030. And this is, 2 years ahead of the IPCC calling for this focus on 1.5. So cities have really shown strong political will. Half of UK councils, or more than half, I don't have the latest numbers, have declared climate emergency. Obviously, they need the support to make the transition, as Nick said. I'm actually contributing to an effort with the UK Cities Climate Investment Commission to see what that could look like. But I think also really interesting to know that local leaders have made it very clear that there is no climate justice without social justice. And we know that the climate crisis has been brought on by the rich and powerful. Just 100 companies are responsible for 71% of historical global emissions. And most of the, 2/3 of those emissions, historical emissions, have been brought in high income countries. So it's the people who have contributed least to this problem that are suffering the most, those poor, vulnerable communities around the world. So it's really clear that our response to the climate crisis needs to be just and inclusive, and we need to build stronger, cleaner, more resilient communities for all. So I think we're at a really pivotal point in time now where we can recover from the pandemic and take really decisive action that sets us on a pathway for a cleaner, healthier, more equitable future. C40 has been very vocal about this. We have a global mayors task force on green and just recovery that was calling for national governments to really take strong action to ensure that our recovery is tackling the climate crisis and pushing for more equitable outcomes. Cities have made really strong commitments in those areas that are really going to be key to spurring the good green jobs, for example, in retrofit, or in committing to developing 15-minute cities, pushing for more sustainable transport. And this year, COP26 hugely significant. There's obviously lots of high expectations on our national governments and opportunity for the UK to demonstrate its leadership, including on how it supports cities to make this transition. But there's also great opportunity through the Cities Race to Zero, which is aiming at getting 1,000 cities committed to taking strong climate action. I think just to note, it's not just about this commitment to 1.5 degrees. C40 is leading the campaign here, and we really emphasize that it has to be also about recognizing that there's a global climate emergency, and that one of the sort of principles that all cities adopt is that they commit to putting inclusive climate action at the center of all urban decision making to create thriving and equitable communities for all. The commitment also requires cities or one of the key principles is that cities engage with other political leaders, CEOs, and trade unions in making this transition happen. And just to say, C40 is, as a network, we're looking at how we can provide support to our cities to deliver this in practice. So we've got an inclusive climate action dedicated program where we've helped cities to integrate inclusivity into the climate action planning process, into driving outcomes that are equitable, in developing lots of tools and knowledge. So I welcome you to please look at all the fantastic tools that we've developed on this. We bring cities together to just like IGN is doing, so that they can learn from each other's experience. And we also support mayors in being advocates. We've got really fantastic new Global Green New Deal pilot program, which is showing, again, how does this look in practice? How do you make this transition for inclusive climate action, equity, just transition? So we've got 5 cities we're working with that are delivering a very, responding to a specific challenge within their cities. It's quite different. In Warsaw, it's around improving air quality, health, and transitioning away from coal. In South Africa, it's how cities can build capacity and engaging with labor unions and driving local just transition movements. In Los Angeles, it's about just transition, but working in the energy sector with labor unions there to make that transition effective. So just wanted to applaud the efforts of all of you in this network, and the joint statement is really powerful. So yeah, congratulate all of you, and C40 is here to help you in any sort of tools, resources to make this transition happen in practice. Thank you.
Thanks so much. We'll definitely be taking you up on that. It'd be great to cross-post and link to the resources that you mentioned on inclusive climate action. Thank you very much, Andrea. So finally, before we invite our political leaders to debate all that they have heard, just a final few closing remarks from Richard, who we've now got back on a more stable connection. Richard.
Hello, hi. You can hear me now, can you?
We can hear you beautifully.
Excellent. And see me hopefully as well, beautifully. So thank you. Apologies for earlier on. It rarely happens, but did happen. I was just saying, closing, that I caught some of the remarks from other speakers there, is that the just transition is a huge opportunity we're dealing with the threat of the climate emergency, but to use the transformation we have to go through as a platform for tackling these inequalities in our society and bringing about social justice. And yesterday, it so happens, I was at Sight Hill in Glasgow, which was an area, with very poor housing for many decades and deprivation. And it's been completely flattened, it's been rebuilt with lots of green space. It's going to be transformational. And that is a just transition project. And that shows what can be achieved with some public support and private sector support at the same time in our cities, which will deliver good quality housing, and a good quality of life for families to be there. So whether it's tackling fuel poverty through the energy transition, or whether it's tackling housing situations like that, this is a big opportunity for us all at local authority level, local community level, as well as national government level, to work together in partnership to make sure we do have a just transition. We don't repeat the mistakes of the past. We get this right, and we achieve our net zero targets at the same time. So my job, in closing, is to bring forward just transition plans for each part of the economy and make sure that happens in the coming decades.
No mean feat, and so we're particularly honoured to have you to join us today. Thank you, Richard, and I'll be following up with your team so we can maybe get some of the other speaking points that you were talking to earlier and disseminate those around the group.
Thank you very much, and good luck, everyone.
So I'd now like to invite our political leaders to reflect on what you've heard from our fantastic external speakers just now. I think Richard there talked about housing, and I'm going to pick on Councillor Darren Rodwell from Barking and Dagenham, if I may, because I know that you've been doing a lot of development in your borough, and it might be a kind of neat way into thinking about the local issues and priorities that you've got there, and how you're responding to some of these challenges. Darren, if I may.
Hopefully you can hear me. I'm in the car, so I'm hoping I've done it.
We can hear you, yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So really interesting, great group of speakers, and it was great to hear the Minister in Scotland. And it's really timely, actually, because I've just come back listening to the Chancellor and the Minister for Transport as well with the Thames Freeport, and what they were talking there about maritime and green, and how that actually links, and then listening to the Northern Powerhouse and the challenges that actually all parts of the country are facing when it comes to levelling up. Many wouldn't know this, but the east of London into the estuary is actually one of the most deprived parts of the country, my borough included. And what's really interesting now is how we're having to educate the different partners about how we can bring people from the lowest incomes, from the most vulnerable situations, into the conversation. And we are very much trying to get a conversation to where those residents feel it's relevant, because the climate change to them means nothing when at this moment in time they're worried about what they're doing with food or heating, or whether they can even clothe their children. So it's about bringing it to their space. So it's about how do we make sure that those jobs are accessible to those people that would have not necessarily had the best education, and that's what we're very much doing with our local partners, with the college and the university here. We're making sure our apprenticeship levy can be used in this area. We're also we've got a company, WeFix, which is our old DLO, and we're using that to make sure that we can deliver the jobs locally. I'm just getting out of the cab. Sorry about this.
It's all right, Dan. I'm going to have to hurry you in any case, because we've got to hear from our other leaders. But just a final close for me.
Yeah. So just finally, it's really a case about making sure that we can connect to the furthest in society the benefits of the change that we need to come with the green economy. That's what I would say we've really got to champion now.
Great, thanks so much. So sort of skipping across the country, given this is a UK-wide initiative, if I could come to Councillor Hugh Thomas, Leader of the Council at Cardiff. We have Hugh.
Sorry, just finding the unmute button. Yeah, great to be with you this morning. I think from our perspective, what we are focusing on now is recovery and renewal from COVID, and really embedding the green and inclusive agenda at the heart of that. I really think there's an opportunity in multiple ways, partly because what we witnessed during the pandemic was the central importance of so many roles and skills in our society that have previously been unrecognised. You know, be that shop workers, bin collectors, all of those roles which have been largely poorly paid. And I think there is a moment here, as we are seeing, you know, driven by market forces with HGV drivers, to rebalance, you know, salaries in this country. Certainly in Cardiff, we're pursuing a really high-profile campaign around the living wage, declaring ourselves a living wage city. We've got something like 40% of all living wage businesses in Wales actually now being based in Cardiff. And over the last 9 years or so, since Cardiff Council became a living wage employer, and we've calculated that creating living wage businesses has put something like 30 plus £million into the local economy of Cardiff. So there's that element, and then there's the greener elements. And again, like many cities in the UK and worldwide, during the pandemic, what we did in Cardiff was transfer over much of our public space, i.e. road space, into space for pedestrians and space for cyclists to get around the city safely. And our ambition really is to lock that in going forward. In the last 4 years, we've created something like 10 kilometres of new segregated cycleways. Our transport strategy sets the course towards a modal shift to 40% of journeys only being made by cars, 60% being made by sustainable modes. And really, as you know, there is a return to the office. I'll remind people in Wales, the regulation is still work from home if you can, but as there is a return, you know, we want people to continue to use non-car modes as part of that recovery. Some really interesting points made during the discussion on green investment. I think
just in a minute, if you can, please. Sorry to rush you.
Okay. I feel like there's much more shared learning we can be doing on the divestment agenda. We've got a commitment in Cardiff to divest our pension fund. Clearly, there are fiduciary duties applying to the trustees of that. So the more I think we can share good examples of how other councils have or are divesting, that would be really helpful in giving confidence to other pension trustees that this is something that can now be achieved.
Excellent, thank you. And that's something for us to take away at the network to assist you in as well. If I could go to two other big cities amongst our membership, Liverpool City Region and Greater Manchester. We've got Deputy Mayor Councillor Williamson and Councillor Elise Wilson. So perhaps Councillor Williamson first.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. It's really lovely to be here and to represent Steve. I'm Jeanette Williamson. I'm leader of Wirral Council. I'm Steve's deputy, and my portfolio on the city region is inclusive growth and community wealth building. And so, you know, it's great to hear what colleagues have said previously, and you know, it's taken away a lot of what I was going to say, but that means I'll be quicker, so that's good for you all. I think for me, you know, just to reiterate the point that post-COVID, our communities have really suffered, and so this is about working where we can to get to tackle the climate crisis through our partnerships, through our investors, and through progressive procurement that has within it social value, but also a requirement that if people want to come and do business, then they have to show and demonstrate that they are working towards the same goals as us with regards to the climate. I think that's something that I'm really keen to get stuck into. On Wirral, we've got a community wealth building strategy that has that in there already, that Steve's tasked me now with rolling that out across the city region. We're also committed to lobbying the Merseyside Pension Fund with regards to divesting divesting direct investment into fossil fuel, and working alongside those really important around that. A community bank where we're working towards with Preston and Liverpool, but again going to be doing that on a city region basis. I think for me this is about, we recognise that economic growth post-COVID, well, to be honest, it should always have been growth that benefits the communities and looks after our climate, but there's an even bigger focus on that now. And the colleague said earlier about, you know, people who have really suffered as a result of COVID and are already suffering. Their first priority isn't the climate, so we have to make it their priority in a way that doesn't disadvantage them. So it's around active travel, it's around fuel poverty, building our communities from the base upwards. Regeneration goes two ways. We can have large scale regeneration, which we need as a city region and we want to attract, but then there's the community-led regeneration that we'll be working on in terms of inclusive economy and community wealth building. And that's a whistle-stop tour, and I hope that's okay.
That's fantastic.
I'm aware of time.
Wonderful, thanks so much, Jan. Elise, please.
So John's now just, let's set the gauntlet, Antje, to see how quickly we can do this. What an exciting and enthusiastic bunch of speakers, and really passionate about the agenda, and I'm really pleased to be amongst you all. Greater Manchester, you know, this is embedded in what we're trying to achieve, and I echo a lot of the comments that were made earlier. For me, the link between levelling up and net zero is intrinsic. That there isn't. I don't think you can deliver one without the other, in all honesty. So that feels to us like a main priority. I'd also say that if we think about where we are in the current climate emergency, COVID recovery, and for Britain, you know, a new relationship with the EU, you know, as the lead on economy for Greater Manchester, I'd be saying the Global Britain agenda is really significant, and it shouldn't be in the shadows of levelling up and net zero, but actually equally important. And that if we're going to deliver a country that is match fit on a global stage, then that levelling up and net zero becomes the route to that. Let's say for Greater Manchester, we're trying to change the fabric and embed what we're doing in everything, every strategy and everything else that comes out of it. We've done a refresh of our LEP. The LEP is, you know, because business, the public sector and the voluntary sector are going to need to work together on this. The LEP now boasts not just social enterprise business leads, but also B Corp and, you know, real talent and from the business sector to drive the agenda. And we are continuing to work with our voluntary sector in a very fundamental way. We've also created an inequalities committee that's driving forward to fill the gaps in inequalities and really give that hand out, not the handout, a hand up instead of a handout, to making sure that we can level and fill those gaps. Some of the key points that we're working on, obviously building on the Greater Manchester's Good Employment Charter. We've announced the city regions levelling a living wage city region within 3 years. So that kind of fits with the work that we continue to drive in the Good Employment Charter. We've got quite bold ambitions around public transport, especially around buses, and taking a big step forward on franchising bus services in order to really make the shift away from private vehicles and giving a credible option to people going forward. We also have, which I don't like the name of, I'll be honest, the retrofit task force, because to me retrofit doesn't really do justice. What we're talking about is when people invest in their properties or invest in their businesses, it's making sure that we're investing in a 360-degree way, thinking about our climate, thinking about the people that are either living in that property or working in that business, and ensuring that not only do we make something that is affordable and cost effective, but really ticking off those other boxes and making it feel absolutely 100% right. I am going to stop.
Brilliant, thank you, Elise.
Time, but thank you very much for having me along with you.
No, fantastic, and really good to broaden our horizons to think about that kind of global, international dimension of all of this as well. So thank you. And then now I'm going to come to Nicola Beach, Bristol, followed by Joe at North Ayrshire, and then Mal O'Hara, please. So starting with Nicola.
Thank you, Charlotte, and it's really great to be here representing Mare East today. I think it's Bristol, 9 times out of 10 you jump out of bed in the morning and you're really grateful for the fact that you live in a city which is not afraid of speaking up on issues around climate action and climate resilience, and my portfolio is managing climate, ecology, energy and waste, and so since May I've been right at the heart of those issues. But unfortunately what that does is masks the real story of Bristol, really, and it's something as an administration that managing the impact of the just transition and actually managing the steps that are needed to be taken to secure that is absolutely critical to our city's future. And I think it's not what you'll read on social media, from the kind of climate activists that we have in our city, who I'm very thankful for, as I say, often, but sometimes it does mask the real story. Our city is wears the battle scars of 120 years of a tobacco industry in the city for a huge section of South Bristol in our city. And what we have a situation now where if you're in what I'd call a normal job in the city, and that's a job where you don't work from home, you have to travel across the city to get to work in our industrial sort of heart in Avonmouth. If we have to secure a just transition, and it was when Henry was speaking about place-based action, I really support that. We need the autonomy as a city to understand how place plays a role in that just transition. We need jobs. We need jobs where people can get to work easily. We need that 15-minute city principle, not just to apply to people going to get their, to go and get their loaf on a Saturday morning and then tootle back to their laptops. We need that 15-minute city to apply to people of all walks of life and with all jobs. And so this subject of a just transition, I think, is absolutely essential to Bristol's future. And there's a huge amount of work to be done in the city. I'll stop there, Charlotte, but thank you. Brilliant. This has been a really insightful discussion.
Oh, thank you so much. So moving to a kind of more rural setting in North Ayrshire, we've got Joe, please.
Hi, Charlotte, thanks very much. I'll try and keep it as brief as I can as well. A bit like Jan and the Wirral, North Ayrshire's got our community wealth building strategy, so much of the last year's been about trying to put that into action. Key bit about diversifying our business base and looking at supporting social enterprises, etc. Put some funds in place to try and help those businesses decarbonise, invest in digital solutions, and been visiting some of those businesses over the last few days, which has been great. Was really interested in what Nick was saying around financing the just transition and getting money into green projects. So we're doing something in North Ayrshire, which is turning our 2 former landfill sites into solar farms. Going to reduce our carbon emissions, provide energy direct to the council, but also bring in significant revenue stream into the council. We're looking at further renewable energy opportunities. And just maybe to end on this, talking about a just transition, one of the things that we are working on is our Ayrshire Growth Deal, which is our equivalent of the City Deal. We have an area in North Ayrshire, Hunterston, which is the site of 2 nuclear power plants. One's in decommissioning just now, the other one is due to be decommissioned over the next few years. We have a former coal site next door to that is included in our Ayrshire Growth Deal, and what we're trying to do now is work with trade unions, other stakeholders, the private sector, the landowners, etc., about that transition from the nuclear power plant to the adjacent site, and how we can maybe position that as a sort of strategic site, not just for North Ayrshire, but Scotland, in terms of the green economy, because it's got the natural assets like a deep water port, existing rail links, good road infrastructure, and it's a massive brownfield site. So just working in that sort of just transition, if you like, from what's currently there and providing employment towards what the future looks like with the public investment in the growth deal. But looking at the time, I'll end there, Charlotte.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And then we go to Mal O'Hara now, before I then turn to Susan Aitken in Glasgow, who's going to talk a little bit more about our joint communique. But Mal first, please, from Belfast.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, and welcome everybody. Great inspirational speakers, and I'm really pleased to be here this morning. I'm Mal O'Hara, Green Party councillor in Belfast City Council. So look, this is my first time here, and I am really inspired by some of the work that I've heard that's been happening across the country. I think in terms of Northern Ireland, we have some specific challenges. I'm sure people are aware of the particular impact of the protocol and the outworkings of Brexit and how that's impacted on our devolved settlement and the precarity of our devolved settlement. You're aware that we had a hiatus for over 3 years. And to be frank, I would say that Northern Ireland, and it's 23 years since the Good Friday Agreement of having some form of local government, we have been laggards really on these issues, and particularly on environmental issues. We do have limited devolved powers to city councils, so it's different to the context in the rest of the UK. We don't have transport powers or housing powers or social care or education for council. So there's a difficult and sometimes challenging interface with regional government about how we drive that forward. In addition, there's also the challenge that our cooperative and social enterprise sector maybe is not as strong as other parts of, while our community and voluntary sector is. And that's in part because we don't have that regional cooperative development agency as such. So as we're moving forward in social value and procurement, we have to complement that with supporting that sector to enable them to get the relevant tenders. We're part of the place-based action network with other cities, as other speakers have mentioned. And in Belfast, some of the work that we've been doing there, we have established a climate unit, and that's the outworking of being part of the Resilient Cities Network and having a resilience commissioner for a period of years, which developed a resilience programme for Belfast, identified 30 programmes of action, which arose from that after consulting widely and engaging with relevant stakeholders. Others have talked about the challenge of seeking finance to develop those programmes. In Belfast, we are developing our local anchor networks, bringing together key stakeholders to see how we can look at social value and procurement. And in Belfast, we have just finished our work on developing a social value policy, and we're about to consult on that. There is a risk. We're being quite ambitious for our initial, looking at a 15% threshold in our social value and procurement to test the water across the market, and that'll be out for consultation soon. So excited about what I can learn from this network and see what we can drive forward in Belfast. But I will say we're further back on this journey than others.
Well, that's the whole purpose of IGN, I'm pleased to say, is to offer that peer support and learning from each other. And then we're all at different places doing different things, but the value is that we want to work with everyone to kind of help make your kind of vision for clean and inclusive growth a reality. And so with that in mind, I'm going to now turn to Councillor Susan Aitken, who's leader of Glasgow City Council. We've asked Councillor Aitken, given Glasgow's hosting COP this year and all eyes are on the city around the world, to just set out what her reflections on the discussion, but also on the joint political communique that we've been working with your directors and lead IGN officers who are also on the call today. So Councillor Aitken, please.
Thanks very much, Charlotte, and thanks everyone for it's been really enjoyable and interesting to listen to some great contributions. I'm going to try not to repeat what others have said. I'm very conscious of time. I think just a couple of things about the communique. For me, I think just making this statement is really, really important. COP26 is two things particularly, well, three. The big thing is that it's the COP that absolutely must deliver. It's the pivotal one. It is, as John Kerry keeps rightly saying, the last best chance to avert catastrophic warming and the impacts of that. It's also the COP of action. It absolutely is going to need to be focused on practical delivery of targets and of ambition. And in parallel with that, alongside that, it will be the COP of cities and municipalities. And I think that's why it's so important that is stated as often as possible. That the leadership on this, the leadership on the delivery will come from leaders at local and regional level, and national governments have to stand behind us and give us the confidence and the assurance to deliver net zero in our own places. And that really is crucial. I don't think that can be stated often enough. And it was, I think, Henry said that along with others, and Richard, my own colleague from Scottish Government, said it as well, that across the UK and indeed across the world, it is municipalities who are ahead of the game on this, who are demonstrating how you actually implement the practical actions, not just to deliver net zero, but to deliver that just transition to net zero as well. And the way the communique talks about just transition, I think, is really important. It's a phrase that's been used, thrown around an awful lot. There are lots of different interpretations of it. A lot of the time, I think it's often interpreted just to mean the oil and gas sector, which is enormously important, but only one element of it. And I think what the communique draws out is that a just transition is multi-layered, and it has to operate on many different levels at once. So yes, it is about oil and gas and other jobs and sectors, which will, let's be frank, become obsolete over time. But oil and gas is not the only one. There are others in there as well. And we have to think that anything connected to diesel and petrol engines, for example, or car engines, we have to think about that in the context of the just transition. And it's also about building sustainability, resilience into all jobs, into all sectors, and ensuring that all new jobs are green jobs, regardless of what sector they're in, that they are high value, fair jobs, and that our citizens have the wherewithal, the skills to access those jobs and to benefit from them. So all of that is in there as well. It's about the impact on existing, often deep-seated inequalities, which many of the leaders on this call will have lived with for a long time and have had long-standing ambitions to address, and been doing work to address for a long time, but taking the opportunity to really accelerate that action, and to whether it's on fuel poverty, whether it's on health inequalities, with a whole range of things. We take the opportunity that we have and the enormous investments that are going to be being made to deliver net zero over the next decade in particular, but beyond that as well, to ensure that every single pound spent delivers multiple benefits for our citizens and communities, and particularly is targeted at reducing inequalities. And just a final very quick word, that the final part, I think, that came out very strongly from Nick's contribution, and also Andrea's as well. And I would just make the recommendation to all colleagues who, like Glasgow, are looking at how we build capacity within our own councils to deal with the financial implications of this. C40 have been a brilliant support and colleague for Glasgow in this. But it is about that fair financing. It's about how we ensure that there's a protective wall put around public services, so it isn't, and I think Henry said this as well, it isn't just local authority money being used to finance this, but also understanding that that it's not so much paying for net zero, but cash flowing it, and understanding that the revenue savings that will come out of this will, and the jobs, the tax revenues, the improved health and well-being will ultimately outweigh the costs. There are enormous benefits to be derived from this investment over the coming years. The big question is, how do we make sure that places, communities, localities benefit from that, and not just central government as well? I'm not sure that we've answered that question yet, but organisations and networks like the IGN are absolutely crucial in pushing for national governments to provide those answers and to stand behind us in delivering what will ultimately be us achieving their national targets on their behalf. I'll leave it there.
That's great. Thank you, Susan. I couldn't wrap it up better by any stretch. So good luck for COP in a few weeks' time. And thank you to everyone who's joined, our fantastic external speakers, all our political representatives from across the IGN. We'll be in touch with your colleagues and we'll be staying on the line with your directors and lead IGN officers after a short break. So we'll say goodbye and thank you again to our political leaders and see you shortly to the directors and lead officers.
Hi everyone, thanks very much for sticking around. Appreciate that 2 hours is quite a long time to be sitting on Zoom. So I think I know everybody here, but my name's Annabelle Smith. I'm the Senior Network Lead for the IGN. If everyone who can could just stick their videos on just so we can all kind of see each other. We want this to be very much a sort of informal conversation. And yeah, so this section is just for us to, based on the conversation that we've just had, which was really inspiring and energizing, I think, to just reflect on the evolution of the IGN so far in its first year, which of course has been quite a strange year to launch a network for everybody. And then also to just have an open discussion about our emerging themes and priorities and what we really want to focus on that would be most useful for you in your places throughout years 2 and 3. But firstly, I wanted to welcome Graham Cook, who is Director of Evidence at Joseph Rowntree Foundation, who fund the network, just to share his reflections on the IGN. Thanks, Graham.
Great, thank you, Annabelle. Lovely to see everybody. Yeah, I'm Graham Cook. I'm Director of Evidence and Policy at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, who support the Inclusive Growth Network. I was until recently the Director of Inclusive Growth at London Borough Barking Dagenham, one of the obviously participant members of the network. So I've been involved from that perspective too, and it's great to be able to continue to be involved through my new role. I mean, like Annabelle, it was great to hear from the political leaders and the level of ambition that there is. And I guess for me, it reflected both the kind of growing confidence of political leadership at our kind of city, at the level of cities and towns of the country, but also obviously kind of the, you know, the central importance of the just transition. So it felt like a very good reflection of that progress, both institutionally, but also in terms of the importance of the issue, and really showcased the role that the network is playing in providing a platform for political leaders to come together and you know, embark on kind of shared endeavours as embodied in the communique. You know, and also drawing on my reflections from my time in Barking Dagenham, you know, it also brought home to me just how much the burden of a just transition falls to local areas and local forms of political authority and action. And I think we saw this morning the, you know, terrific ambition from people, but I know from my time as a senior officer that we've got a long way to go to be able to build the kinds of resources, leadership capability, institutional capacity to really act at the scale and level that we need to do. You know, we did a, you know, like all colleagues in the room, you know, we had retrofitting work, we had district heating, and we tried to get kind of, you know, modal transport shifts and decarbonize our fleet and all the stuff that will be on everyone's list. And I often certainly personally felt that we were kind of, you know, we were going as fast as we could and doing as much as we could, but the scale of our action, you know, we just weren't able yet to work at the level we were able to meet the targets that we've got. And as much as central government's got a crucial role to play on that, so much of the delivery relies on local areas. And I suppose in addition to that kind of role in terms of providing political leaders with a platform to connect and agree on shared agendas, for me, the network's also got this really crucial role in collectively kind of building the capability of city leadership, leadership at local authority level to be able to kind of back that up. Now that's really hard because we're coming from a place where power and resources very, very centralized in the UK. But I guess one of the roles of the network for me is how do we kind of turbocharge that and how do we bridge that gap as quickly as we can, which is partly about arguments around devolution and where power and resources should sit, but is just as importantly, even more importantly, about how we bring people in this conversation and others in people's kind of home authorities, as well as the politicians along, to think hard about how we're going to build the kinds of institutions, capability, leadership, resource that we need to be able to do what needs to be done on something like just transition, as well as, you know, the other themes that we're going to touch on in the next hour. And so for me, that is kind of the key role that the network can provide. And I saw it as a participant member of the network from Barking Dagenham, and I'm delighted to be able to kind of continue to work with you all and colleagues at CPP, Metro Dynamics and others to kind of build that up over the next year or so.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Graham. And now I'm just quickly going to, I don't want this to be very sort of presentation heavy, but I'm going to quickly share my screen with you just so that I can show you, this. Here we are. The joys of technology. I don't know why it's asking me to do that. Bear with me 1 second. This is the joy of doing everything over Zoom. I might have to just keep my screen small then, but can everybody see that okay? So I just wanted to very briefly look back over the past year, the first year of the IGN with you all. And these were the key policy themes that we established, very much driven by yourselves, by lead officers. And now more recently, we've been doing a lot of manifesto analysis where there've been local elections, and based our emerging themes and priorities on those, and of course on the conversations that we're having with all of you. So our key, I think, very cross-cutting themes over the past year are, you know, absolutely familiar to you all, and with what Graham's just been speaking about. So, you know, good work, skills, green recovery and the just transition, and health inequalities. And that's all framed by how we see it, an inclusive recovery, which of course some of our political leaders touched on just now. Measurement and monitoring, we do see that as a key emerging priority for the IGN, is to also help you measure and monitor your progress around inclusive growth. Investing for inclusive growth, which Zoe will talk about in a minute. It's definitely a theme that we see emerging, particularly in terms of the just transition, but not limited to that, in terms of the role of business and good work, and also leveraging community wealth, which again was touched on a little bit. So that's just a very quick run through of, you know, how we see the key thematic priorities for the IGN for the past year. And just quickly, this is a little bit small, but in terms of how, you know, the mechanisms for supporting you with delivery around those strategic themes, we want to have a bit of a discussion about what are the different types of support that have worked well for you, what would you like to see more of, what perhaps hasn't worked quite as well. So there's been a significant peer-to-peer element to the IGN, which, you know, is incredibly important given that we're all facing very similar challenges in many ways. So lots of different workshops around those key themes, where we've sort of had case studies from within the IGN, but also brought in a range of external expert speakers. Of course, what I think personally sets the IGN apart largely to a lot of other place-based networks is the implementation advice, which is fully funded by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. So we're going to have North Ayrshire speak to their experience of that in a moment. So that 10 days of funded support per year. We've commissioned research of collective interest, which we can continue to do on certain themes. We've had training webinars with external experts, and that has taken quite an informal tone so far in terms of these kind of office hours almost with certain experts. And then finally, our annual workshop to inform local and national ambitions, which we're hoping will be in person next year. So that's just a very quick run through, and I'm going to hand over to Catriona Macaulay now, who's Head of Economic Growth at North Ayrshire Council, to just, as I say, briefly share your experiences of the implementation advice and how that supported your priorities in North Ayrshire. Catriona.
Thanks, Annabelle. So yes, it's my first meeting of the network. I'm delighted to be here. So as I was introduced, I'm Katrina Macaulay. My title is Head of Economic Development and Regeneration at North Ayrshire Council. I'm delighted to speak about our experience in terms of the support that we've received in developing an inclusive economy dashboard. So the work really follows a journey that we have been on for some time, probably the last 4 years, where we recognised that our approach to economic development and the current economic model was not fit for purpose within North Ayrshire, and that led us on a journey of a series of quite innovative projects. Including things like a basic income pilot, an inclusive growth diagnostic, and then eventually to developing our community wealth building strategy, which was the first in Scotland. And then we had COVID, and our response to COVID was a green economic recovery and renewal plan, very much based around a Green New Deal. And within that plan, we made a commitment that we would come back with an inclusive economy dashboard and how we would measure progress, recognising that recovery had to be based on a just and fair transition. So we were delighted that there was the opportunity to access that support through this network and the 10 days. As a small local authority on the west of Scotland, we have very small teams, and whilst we have really good people, and we're lucky to have good people within our teams that can contribute to these networks, we don't have much capacity. And I suppose very much recognising some of the points that were made earlier about building that capacity within the organisation, accessing external expertise and support in this area has been really important. So we took up that available expertise. It allowed us then to facilitate corporate discussions with services across the council, because our model very much focused on a life cycle approach from birth and early years through to old age. So all services across the council can contribute to what they're doing across that life cycle, and looking at appropriate measures that we should be working corporately on. And again, we've always strongly messaged in all our strategic work that this is about long-term transformational change of both our organisation and how we do things, and also about how we change our place as well. So recognising that we needed to put in those building blocks of having those conversations with leaders within those services, and bringing them very much on this journey about what the priorities needed to be. So it allowed us access to that support. We were able to, have good conversations with the expertise that we accessed. That expertise as well was exposed to external scrutiny as well. So again, having people with expertise being questioned on our approach was really useful to us, because as a small service we would have struggled to resource all of that. That all helped build awareness across the organisation. It also helped build understanding, and also just build that knowledge and support for this agenda, and getting buy-in from services. So that led to our report to our executive leadership team, and a development, an agreement and approval of the model, and that was then subsequently approved at Cabinet just earlier this year. We have agreed that we will 6-monthly review the dashboard and go back with reports against our performance against that. And I think more than that, I think we're now on a journey with that dashboard where that will start to influence future corporate planning. The council will be due to renew its new corporate plan early next year, following local government elections. And I think we have now built the dashboard into the infrastructure of the organisation, and it will be well placed to then drive the change in terms of future priorities, both in corporate planning but other strategic plans that are being developed by the council. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Catriona. And I think what comes through really clearly is that you already very much had the kind of ambitions and the ideas, and what this support that the IGN enabled you to do was to actually really take that forward and to design that into what you do. and to enable you to really kind of innovate around, North Ayrshire is one of the first authorities that I saw who actually took the economic inclusion and just transition agendas and brought them together and ensured that they sit at the heart of your governance system as a local authority. So I think it's really impressive that, we've been able to help kind of sow the seed of that, which was delivered by Metro Dynamics, who are one of our partners for the IGN, and that now is going to develop and grow and sort of really have a key role in North Ayrshire's local authority and how you actually work. So I think that was a really great example of implementation advice. So thanks for that. Just being conscious of time, we want to just have a bit of a discussion about emerging themes and key priorities for years 2 and 3. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Zoe, who is Head of Policy at CPP.
Hi there, thank you, and great to see you all today. And really pleased that the next slide, if Annabelle, if we could get up the sort of emerging themes slide, fits quite nicely with what we've just heard from our political leaders in the discussion we just had just now. So as Annabelle mentioned, we very much, the themes are your themes. They come from conversations that we have with you, your colleagues, and also political advisors. And then, of course, off the back of the manifestos at the last local election were super informative. Oh, that's perfect, Annabelle, thank you. In helping us decide those themes. And actually, funnily enough, Richard Lockhead, MSP's job title, Just Transition, Employment and Fair Work, brings together the elements that we're so far choosing to focus on this year. So just to kind of touch on 3 things. Firstly, I just want to touch on the sort of topic focus that we're proposing for the year or 2 ahead. So that will be then something we discuss. So I'll just give a bit of an intro into that and then we can discuss it. We'd like to also just raise the sort of the way in which we support you and any feedback or ideas you have for things you find most helpful or would like most to do in this as we go into our 2nd year. And thirdly, how we capitalise on the political engagement that we've had to date and today, and how you'd like to best bring in your leaders along the kind of journey of getting on with pilots, implementation advice, and all the rest of it. So those are 3 things I'd just like to touch on in the next few minutes before opening it up to you all for discussion. So firstly, just in terms of topic selection, as I mentioned, based on our conversations and manifestos and political imperatives, we see a real sweet spot for the IGN is this bringing together of the local just transition and the role of kind of good work, quality jobs and local labour markets and helping deliver that. So as we heard this morning on the kind of local just transition side, that's about investment, both use of your own investment funds and leveraging in private support. That's about how the transition is being designed, so your specific climate policies and who they benefit the most. Do they help you address local fuel poverty, for instance? And actually an idea that just came up in the last session, which I don't think we've so far reflected in the programme, is this idea of divestment. Are you as a council investing your money in green, sustainable areas through pensions or otherwise? That's another area we could look at collectively. And something that Susan Aitken raised just there at the end that I thought was really inspiring was about this kind of revenues from the just transition. Like, hey, at the end of the day, investing now in a local just transition will save money later. And how do we account for that? And is there something we could design to capture those benefits and demonstrate the power of intervening now? So I think those are some ideas on the sort of local just transition side. And then totally linked to that, as we've just heard this morning, how that links to the good work, quality jobs agenda. Just a few things to say there. So, we've talked about skills a lot to date, but there's specifically, skills both on the supply of skills through the local skills system, but also the demand for skills from employer in the area. There's something there also around, the role of business. We touched on procurement, good work charters. Those are sort of the bread and butter, I'd say, of local inclusive growth, but what's the next step for those? And thirdly, reflecting what we've learned throughout the pandemic on flexible home working, part-time working, living wage cities, and all the good stuff, all the good content that comes out of living work charters. So I think those are the kind of big topics and themes. Before I give you any more information, does anybody want to reflect, take this moment to reflect, or give any feedback on whether you think those are the right themes, or whether you have any other ideas or things you'd like to cover through the network this year in terms of topic? Okay, Joan is the only person not on mute, but
it all looks, yeah, that all looks good. It all ties in with sort of, see, it was a good summary, bringing it together with the obviously the meeting that we've just had and the discussions, and from a just transition, there's quite a lot of areas come off that, aren't there? So I think having that as the umbrella, I can see relevance of many different areas that we are progressing across the north of Tyne. I think I just need to get my head around how that does all fit together from us as a combined authority. I know different colleagues are working on different things that could fit under this umbrella. There was a few of us met the North of Tyne Mayor earlier today, and he describes it very eloquently, but I just need to have a chance in my mind to see how that fits together. But I think what you're suggesting there will enable us as a combined authority and as an officer group to see how different elements of work that we do and do fit together, to have a much sort of clearer, joined up approach for this just transition.
I like that a lot, around the kind of narrative and communicating how it all comes together, and actually how net zero and the just transition will cut across, as Jamie said to us this morning in our meeting with Mayor Driscoll, does cut across his whole economic agenda and the fairness and of economic inclusion.
Yeah, I think it can also be, as simple as, it isn't necessarily about, a local or combined authority, NTCA, for example, coming to us with the answer on this is how it fits together for us currently internally. I think also, institutionally, we can kind of help support how those things come together. So, we did a piece of work recently for Belfast, just a very quick piece of work to support them with kind of institutionally, how can they structure their organisation to actually make sure that, the day-to-day running of the organisation, those two interlinked priorities are, very much side by side. So I would also kind of emphasize in terms of using the implementation advice support, but also even just more informally, like we're very much here to help figure those challenges out.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything? Oh, Ravi, yes.
Hi, cheers, sorry. So I'm Ravi from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. This might be a bit too granular, but what I found really interesting in the conversation just now was the idea of municipal bonds and how local government can raise funds, or regional government as well in this case. It was a recommendation in a recent inequalities report that the Greater Manchester Commission was run independently. And to be totally candid, it was a great recommendation, but it's such a big thing to get your head around, but no one's actually sort of made the first step. You know what I mean? And maybe it's me should be making the first step, I don't know. But yeah, I really appreciate some sort of further help and support and guidance on how to get that up and running if possible.
Brilliant suggestion, thank you. Yeah, and totally agree. They're talked about a lot, but that's exactly the kind of peer-to-peer or getting our specialist supporters in to help you with that. So thank you for that suggestion. That's super helpful. Fiona, did you want to come in there?
Yes, just really briefly. For me, the topic focus absolutely makes sense and really supportive of that. I think the other sort of angle for it, and I think what's become more important when we've been talking about inclusive growth, particularly over the last 18 months, is where both sort of addressing the climate, net zero, etc., inclusive growth and health intersect. It's kind of, it's the system, it's the whole thing. And for me, helping to make sense of where are the best interventions and what can we do that really actually hits all three of those is, something that I'm thinking about all the time. So any help with things like that would be great. I think when I think about sort of the type of support that's been valuable, certainly for me, and within Leeds, there's a number of things, and I think some of it is that access to sort of expertise and ideas, because sometimes when you get your head down in the day job, and most of us have been really, you know, doing that, and you know, dealing with COVID, so having that thinking space and stepping back and having, you know, access into a network that's actually just then lets you raise your head above all of that, I think that's has been totally like really valuable, and along with sort of the implementation advice that we're starting to draw down as well. So I'm really sort of excited about sort of the next year, about what we can do. Thank you.
And out of interest, is in terms of COP26, like obviously we've got now the communique that's kind of positioned ahead of that, but do you anticipate, you know, is there anything that's happening in your places that's anticipating what will come out of that and what expectations will be on you, or is that kind of to be seen? We have to kind of have the summit first and take it from there. Fiona, did you want to?
No, I don't. No, I think we need to be saying. I need to check in. I think institutionally, Leeds, whilst we're getting better at moving things together, I don't think we're quite there. So we, you know, I need to check in with some of that a bit more. Yeah.
I think in Bristol, our academics are potentially going to do a piece of work following COP as to what that might mean for the UK, for the region and for the city. So that might give us some guidance. And on the priorities, everything that you've mentioned around pensions, divestment, municipal bonds, and particularly this idea of looking at investment more as cash flow, because you will have future benefits. All of that would appeal very much, I think, to my colleagues in Bristol.
Super. Brilliant. Has anybody else got any final comments on the topics selection? Brilliant. Well, it sounds like we're sort of, I feel like it's all converging. You know, we have our political, we've kind of touched on this discussion before, so I'm really pleased that we're kind of bringing it together. The second point that I just wanted to raise was just about the way in which we support you and what's most helpful from your perspective. And I know that it might be kind of implementation advice for one thing, peer support for another, but we just wanted to check in to see that we're getting that balance between having the kind of peer-to-peer sessions and you know, one-to-one advice or smaller groups in peers, and just anybody's reflections on what's worked best for their places so far, or what you'd like to see more of.
I think it's been a good mix. I think I would think I need to be more proactive in approaching you about the support that you're able to give. So yeah, I think I would feel that's just down to be me to approach you to then say, look, we're working up this idea, or could you support with some expert advice? But I think it certainly feels that peer-to-peer connection you've done behind the scenes as you've found different things out, and I've certainly welcomed that the national and the international expertise that you've provided, and certainly depending on the topics, being able to invite some of my other colleagues along to those sessions so that they can hear firsthand as well. So yeah, I think for me the takeaway is, as a reminder, is there's a lot more support available through the network, but I think I need to take more advantage of that.
Brilliant. But also, you know, just to sort of jump in there, you know, Fiona also made that point very well about, you know, and I know it from my own background in local government, that you're so focused on, you know, day-to-day delivery, and often so much of what you have to do is incredibly reactive. You know, we're also here to kind of help you think through what would be most useful. So I don't want people to think that, you know, you need to come to us with a fully fledged proposal, for example, for using your implementation advice. Like, we're very happy and, you know, very available to kind of work through it with you. And, you know, if you've got, say, you know, 2 or 3 ideas that potentially might benefit from particularly implementation advice support, we're very much here to talk through it. So I just want to sort of emphasize that point, that it doesn't need to be a sort of fully fledged proposal, and we're here to help you kind of stick your heads above the day-to-day, as Fiona put it, which I thought was really well put.
I think also, just sorry, who's that?
Sorry, just to ask
Yeah.
if your PowerPoint there will you send that out? Will you circulate that?
Absolutely.
Just so I can have a further conversation with the team, and maybe come back with some written comments if there's anything else.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Absolutely.
And also just to say that as we kind of do more and more of the implementation advice, so for instance, we're just talking with Ravi and colleagues about a piece on flexible work in Greater Manchester, which I think will be of massive broader interest to the network. So also sharing the learnings from implementation advice as we go along, and you can always get ideas from other places. So like if suddenly you want your version of the flexible work analysis that's being done in GM, like, you know, that's really welcome too. And we're always trying to draw links between what's happening in each place so that you're learning from one another, given that there's so many shared challenges between the network, and that's our kind of reason of being. So no, that's really good to hear. Super, and we'll get that slide pack round. Okay, lovely. And then just finally, and we won't keep you for the full hour if we don't need it, but just to touch on political advocacy. And thank you, Val, sorry for your feedback in the chat, that you're also making the point about integrating health and well-being considerations into inclusive economy. Yeah, no, so that's really point well made. And I think, yeah, that triangle that Fiona set out for us, the health, IG, net zero, I think is exactly it. That's the sweet spot, really. So that's brilliant. Okay. If there aren't any final comments on that bit, I just wanted to touch on political advocacy and how you think, or what would be most useful to you in terms of getting your political leaders up to speed on certain bits of the agenda, or using that kind of voice and political advocacy to advance agendas. Like, how best do you see their role in this, or are we best kind of doing things between us and then presenting them with ideas later? Like, how is it working for you locally in that respect? Obviously, we had the conversation directly with Jamie Driscoll this morning, didn't we, Lee? And we've done similarly with other political leaders, and some obviously more come to our annual get together. So how do you think that plays out? Because we've got a few ideas our end about bringing them kind of closer into the fold, but only if that's useful to you guys.
I think what was good to see from, you know, our perspective is that there is real political engagement, you know, and they were definitely energizing each other in that discussion around the kind of shared challenges. So I wonder if, you know, potentially there might be, you know, we've considered in the past creating kind of shared forums for the political leaders to come together and work through some of those issues as a group. Which for me, you know, that's what I was sort of thinking about when they were talking, is that seems like it could be something that's useful. And that also it isn't always necessarily, you know, it doesn't always necessarily have to be, particularly with mayoral combined authorities, it doesn't always have to be the mayor, you know, that the cabinet lead can also, you know, play a very significant role in that. So that's what came through to me anyway in that discussion.
I wouldn't, it's not that I wouldn't want to, but it's not my place to speak on behalf of my mayor, I suppose, in terms of different events or forums that he might want to come to. He would obviously have to work that through at the time, but I do think, well, I mean, just to think there's obviously the just transition focus of the meeting we've had before. Our mayor's keen to sort of, for us to work it through as opposite groups, but then he's always happy to provide a quote, or earlier on today he would do the vox pop thing, the jargon. I'm not up on all of the jargon of the social media world, but yeah, so he's always happy to sort of go, yeah, I agree, and he'll do his little spin. But so even if it's not necessarily that has got the time, or it's just not really on his radar to sit in a forum and discuss it, he's always happy to sort of support with a quote. So if there was something to come out that we've discussed it and we've worked through, he would back that up, especially in line with what we've been talking about today. That's very much in line with his priorities, and does sort of ring through with what he's promoting with that net zero, zero carbon, zero poverty. Get the words right. So yeah, I think it's just finding the time, isn't it, for those leaders to get together. Can be tight sometimes, but it's not to say he's not supportive.
I would say certainly from my leader, you know, I think he will welcome the network very strongly. You know, I think that, you know, the whole issue of leadership and local leadership, very often our political leaders can be quite isolated with this agenda, you know, because maybe they're leading traditional parties that are not necessarily always on message. And I think, you know, in the same way we as officers and organisations are trying to build our capacity, our political leadership also needs to build their knowledge. And I think, you know, that opportunity to learn what other leaders are doing in other cities equally applies to them as it does to officers. So I think we should really encourage our political leaders to be part of a network like this. And obviously online's great, but, you know, I really welcome the day when actually we can get together, because it's those informal discussions, I think, for all of us, particularly with a network like this, that I think are going to be really important that we get back in place, you know, more so I think than go back to the office. It's these sort of networks and discussions and informal discussions where we can collaborate more, I think are going to be really important in our future.
No, it was actually something on the back of today. I was sort of like hungry to see everyone like face to face, and whether we do that by, you know, between the CPP team, I'm based in Liverpool, Annabelle's in Bristol, Charlotte's in the south. So between us, we could probably either come meet you first one-to-one, or ideally get together as a group. So we'll probably kind of informally get in touch about that and see if that's something that you're up for, because I feel like after 18 months of Zoom, we're getting a bit fatigued, let's say. Ben, did you want to come in there?
It was just that I think it's also been really good to have had the engagement today, and that you've had in the last few days building up to this, because I think what you've all just been saying is really right, that actually this is a huge space for leadership, local leadership. And you know, if you think we've just been through the most unusual and disruptive time of any of our lives, and local leadership has been critical in communicating with people about what that means, about behavior change, about how we function as places. And we're talking about a transformation over the next 2 or 3 decades in the way our economy is structured, in the way that we behave, in the way we move around. And fundamentally, all of that is really quite political. It's not just about you know, technical and technological policy solutions. It also requires dialogue with the public and leadership. And so I think that support for what how you effectively, the connective tissue between certainly in a UK and an English context, between, say, levelling up and green transition, is a really fundamental one for us. And how all of that comes together, and the role of leaders in explaining that and creating a space for it, is something that we have quite a big opportunity, I think, to help with some of the language about that. To go, for example, I mean, I've been in some recent work that Henry referred to earlier, talking to a lot of northern leaders and mayors, and one of they're both optimistic about green transition, but I think they recognise that we've got to get beyond language, which is just green, for example, to being more granular about what does that actually mean? What kinds of jobs are we talking about? What does that mean for people's existing jobs and for future jobs? Who's going to be doing them? How are they going to be trained for them? And that is almost like a new language we've got to help develop for leaders, and I think they're keen to articulate.
Thank you. Absolutely. Charlotte, did you just want to come in there?
Yeah, just one more thing from me, and I think it's just that I don't want to lose sight of why we set up IGN. I don't think there's any risk of that, but it's just really making sure that we sit in the sweet spot between all the efforts on achieving net zero on the one hand, and then thinking about inclusive growth, and that having a history that predates the pandemic and all the rest. And and that's why, you know, talk of just transition is key. The language isn't necessarily helpful in a kind of public setting, to Ben's point, and I think we do need to think about that. Jamie Driscoll was talking to us about zero carbon, zero poverty this morning, but inclusive growth isn't necessarily just about poverty alleviation either, although that's a core component of it. So there's a huge amount of complexity, and we're in kind of new space, but just one thing I'd want to make sure that the IGN keeps hold of is that we're not kind of pivoting to a green economy network, but we are thinking about how in doing that, we're making sure that we protect the most vulnerable communities, and we're paving the way forward for inclusive, sustainable economic growth, shared prosperity, productivity, and all the rest. So that would just be my plea.
Brilliant. Well, Lee, I think you've got to leave now because we're 45 past, but unless anyone's got any further points, I suggest we will have a Zoom break, give ourselves a Zoom break before our next meetings, but it's been brilliant to have you here this morning, brilliant to hear from your leaders, so thank you for all that you've done on that front, and it's great to work alongside you all and continue to work alongside you all, and we're really excited about this year and this bringing together the health, the just transition and inclusive growth, and working that out all together in this forum. So thanks again. We'll be back in touch just to finalise the communique with yourselves and colleagues, just to get that signed off, so that's ready to go ahead of COP26 as our first sort of joint communication from our political leaders. So again, another really exciting moment, putting IGN a bit more publicly on the map as we go into year 2. So great to have you here, great to see you. We'll hopefully see you soon, and we'll see if we can do a face-to-face. Hey. All right now.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.